So you're thinking about moving to the Jacksonville, Florida area because you've heard so many great things like the proximity to the beach, the amazing weather we have here, or even how affordable it is here in Jacksonville. Well, before you start packing up that U-Haul, in this video, we're gonna go over a different side of Jacksonville. That way you can fully determine if this is the right city for you and your family. So let's get right on into it. So as someone who was born and raised here in Jacksonville, and who's been in real estate for over 12 years in Jacksonville, I can say this with confidence, but I love Jacksonville as a city. You know, it fits a lot of me and my family's wants and needs and goals for the future. But ultimately, when it comes to deciding on where to move, you have to understand Jacksonville is not a perfect city by any means. Now, I will counter that with saying that there really is probably no perfect city or town out there. That every city and town is gonna have things that you're gonna like and things you're not gonna like. But in this video, we're gonna definitely dive into 10 different things to consider when moving here to Jacksonville. Things that I think could be very important. And again, as we're going through this video, if you have any questions about anything we're going over, or just wanna get more insight into different neighborhoods or Jacksonville as a whole, don't hesitate to call, text, or email me. My information will be on the screen, so super easy to get a hold of me. My goal is always to help answer any and all questions that you and your family may have. But starting off, the first thing we're gonna go over is hurricanes. Hurricanes is something that when you live in Florida as a whole, something that you have to really consider because of the fact that we do have, hurricane season, and that's typically gonna really run, they say really, I think end of May, beginning of June is when it starts, and it goes till, about Thanksgiving. But here in Jacksonville, and really Florida as a whole, you really have to be on the lookout from, say, beginning of August through maybe the second week of November. So it is a pretty healthy stretch there. And obviously we've had hurricanes in the state over the last decade or so that has created quite a bit of damage. It's going to actually tie into a couple of our other bullet points we're going to be going over in this video as well. But ultimately the thing to remember when it comes to hurricanes is they are unpredictable. And just like with hurricane season here in Florida, you do always have other weather events in other parts of the country that you have to always consider when moving there as well. So that would be my counterpoint to that. But what's really cool about Jacksonville is that we tend to miss most direct impacts from these major storms. And it's not to say that we don't get impacts, because we definitely do, whether if it's sometimes some minor flooding, or if it's loss of power due to heavy winds or heavy rains. We do get them from these hurricanes, even if it's not a direct impact. But the beauty of this city is the infrastructure has been built up in a way to where most of Jacksonville, if you do lose power or water, it's for a very minimal amount of time. And believe it or not, before you know it, you'll have power right back. So that is one of the reasons actually why I love Jacksonville, but it is something to consider when you are thinking about making a move here to Jacksonville. The next thing to consider is homeowners insurance. So with homeowners insurance here in the state of Florida, we actually pay one of the highest rates across the board in the whole continental United States when it comes to homeowners insurance. And this is one where, as I was mentioning previously, hurricane season has definitely impacted why homeowners insurance is as high as it is. It's not the only reason. I can go into detail about a lot of fraudulent roofing claims. I can also go over the fact that there's been a lot of plumbing claims that has caused insurance providers to kind of have to increase what they're charging. But ultimately, it's something that you do need to consider when moving here, because we do have one of, if not the highest, rates across the board for homeowners insurance. Now, believe it or not, in a little quick quiz, if you have an older house that's say 1960s and it's an all brick or block house, and then you have a brand new wood frame house, which do you think would be the cheaper homeowners insurance rate-wise here in Jacksonville? Believe it or not, it's actually that new construction house, even though you would think that that older 1960s house, even if everything was brand new, would be cheaper because it's a brick or block construction. In some regards, insurance is actually more just looking at the general overall age of the structure, not necessarily the material used for that structure. So I can go into more detail on that, but also with insurance, it's not just homeowners. We also see elevated car insurance rates. So that isn't to consider when moving here is you are gonna see a higher car rate for your insurance and home rate for your insurance. So things to really keep in mind. From homeowners insurance though, the next thing we are gonna touch on, which does play very hand in hand with homeowners insurance, is just affordability across the board, plus taxes here in the state of Florida. When it comes to the affordability here in Jacksonville, It is something that people, especially locals, are having a hard time with ever since COVID. And that's because when it came to some of the major metro areas in the state of Florida, Jacksonville was always considered that hidden gem when it came to affordability and pricing of homes, or just home prices in general, compared to other cities like Orlando, Miami, Tampa, Sarasota. And when COVID occurred, we saw a mass influx of homeowners moving to Jacksonville, which really did cause a spike in pricing. Now, we have started to see that start to level off some, but overall, what it really has done is it has really put Jacksonville on the map as definitely one of those major metros in Florida that people are gravitating towards. Now, in conjunction with that, because of these higher prices on home values, we also have seen taxes also increase for your property taxes for these homes. And a lot of the reason for that is because home prices are going to dictate your property taxes due to the tax rate. But also we have seen a push, especially in Duval County, which is going to be more your central Jacksonville, of an increased millage rate to obviously fund different projects throughout the city, which has also created a bit of an elevation in your tax that you're paying. So, and that's the thing to consider too when moving here to Jacksonville is Duval County, which is going to be more of your central Jacksonville, has one of the highest millage rates, which is what your taxes get based off of, here in the state of Florida. Now, that is also why we do tend to see people gravitate towards Nassau County to the north, St. Johns County to the south, or Clay County to the west. But the thing to keep in mind with those three counties is a lot of those new construction neighborhoods that you find in those counties have what's called a CED fee, which is an additional tax that you pay to live in those communities. When you take into account those CED fees and you add those with your standard taxes, because those CED fees are a special assessment tax, believe it or not, it does kind of put your overall taxes about the same as Duval County. It's just not all directed to the same place the way Duval County's is. So again, that's something to consider when you're thinking about making a move here. And it's why some people choose not to move here, to be quite honest. But ultimately, it all comes down to finding the home that's the right fit for you and the city that's the right fit for you when it comes to moving in general. Now, the next point we're gonna go over is going to be the weather, and specifically that brutal heat that I'm sure you always hear about. So I gotta be honest with you, when it comes to the weather here and the heat, I mean, it's about what you would expect, and it's not always just because of the pure temperature, it's because of the humidity that we get here. Really from May through October, that humidity mixed with just the overall, that summer heat really can make it unbearable for some people. And it's something that you have to really consider when making a move here to Jacksonville. Now, for me personally, I actually like it. It is one of those things that, just walking to your car can feel like a workout. And sometimes just being outside for 5-10 minutes can definitely lead to having to maybe change your shirt. Funny story, when I was in college, I actually went to University or Florida State University over in Tallahassee, and believe it or not, the humidity was even worse there. And I remember my first day on campus just walking to class and my whole shirt just being soaked by the time I got to my first class of my freshman year. Thankfully, here in Jacksonville, we do get a nice breeze off of the ocean, so it kind of keeps things a little bit cooler versus more inland like how Tallahassee is. But it is one of those things that from May through October, again, it kind of coincides with hurricane season, that humidity and that heat here is something that you have to consider when making a move here. It does also mean though that if you are looking to get a better tan, you'll definitely have a lot of opportunities to do that here in Jacksonville between our beautiful beaches that we have here mixed with that heat that makes it very quick to tan, or in some cases, or as I get older, burn. Besides that though, another reason that people always have to consider when moving here is actually that traffic that we see here along with urban sprawl, which we're gonna go over now. With the traffic here, if traffic's not your thing, you really are gonna wanna listen to this, really determine if Jackson makes the most sense for you. Really Florida, when it comes to major cities, makes sense, because here in Jacksonville, we do have quite a bit of traffic. This is a city that is not the most walkable. A lot of times I get asked the question of, do we have to have a car here if we're gonna move here? And for the most part, 99% of where you're gonna live here in Jacksonville, you're gonna need some form of private transportation. In some cases, you may even, again, if you're, for most families, will wanna have multiple means of private transportation, multiple vehicles for a household, due to the fact that to really get anywhere in Jacksonville, you're gonna have to drive. I know it's for some people, for some cities, that's not the case. Here, that is 100% the case. And so with the fact that there is a lot of driving required here in Jacksonville, it does lead to a good bit of traffic. Now, we don't have the traffic levels that you'll see in other major metros like Orlando, Miami, and Tampa. I can't even imagine living, near the Tampa area with dealing with I-75 every day. If you know, you know. But here in Jacksonville, the traffic can be a bit of a concern at times, but it's not going to be the worst you're going to see across the board for other major cities in Florida or other parts of the Southeast United States. And with that, though, does come that urban sprawl that occurs. And so ultimately, what I will say is that the city here is doing a good job of increasing the roads around town, expanding on them, constantly working on repaving different roads. I know around our office that we do actually have a lot of roads that were just redone, which is a blessing. So again, it may take some time, but overall there is an emphasis being made by the city here to work on that. So overall, although it is something to consider and definitely can be seen as maybe a reason to not move to Jacksonville, I would say that if you're looking for a major city to live in, it is not nearly as bad as some other cities in the state or the area that you could be considering when it comes to traffic. So with traffic comes our next point, and honestly, they kind of go hand in hand even more so, is honestly the overdevelopment of Jacksonville. I do get those comments all the time, Justin, Jacksonville's just not what it used to be. There's construction everywhere. It's not why I want to live here. And for some people that is the case. But ultimately it is a double-edged sword, because with construction comes more opportunities for people. It gives you more options to choose from, and it does bring more businesses here, which does increase the quality of life for people, as it gives you more options to increase your income as well with those opportunities. So although there are downsides to it, there also are upsides to it. And what we really are seeing right now is here in Duval County, like I said, more that core Jacksonville, there's not as much construction going on or over construction, because of the fact that most of the Jacksonville has already been developed. Whereas other parts of the area are more focused on residential, here in Jacksonville, there is a huge focus on commercial construction and opportunities to be created for the residents here. And you're seeing it not just in day-to-day places, but you're also seeing it in the projects that we have going on around town, such as the development of the new Jacksonville Jaguars football stadium. That with it will bring more opportunities for workers. It also will bring more opportunities for the downtown area of Jacksonville, as it will ideally bring more people down there for more events and more often, which can be a boom for the downtown area. But then you do have Nassau County to the north, Clay to the west, and St. Johns County to the south, where you are seeing a massive amount of new construction homes being built. And part of the reason for that is there was an underdevelopment of homes, not just here in Jacksonville, but throughout the country in the mid-2000s, 2010s. And so now we have been working on catching back up. But here in Jacksonville, you almost see too much of it because of the fact that there's just so much going on. So although it is something to consider, it does also mean that if you are looking to make a move here, you will have multiple options to choose from, whether if you want an older home or a new construction home, because of what's being developed and built at this time. So although it is something to consider, I personally think it's more of a positive, as long as this doesn't occur for too many more years as far as the amount of homes being built, because I do also believe that at some point we may see too much construction being done, so that is something to kind of monitor across the board. So the next thing to consider when moving to Jacksonville, which you may think when I say this, I go, really, Justin, that's something to consider? That's nothing for me. But you may also, hear this and be like, oh, thank you, Justin, for bringing this up. But it is really the wildlife here in Jacksonville, Florida. And the main wildlife that we're going to reference here is going to be your alligators, your snakes, your bugs, flies, for instance. And it is something that you're going to find throughout the state of Florida, due to the fact that there's a lot of different parts that you have a lot of marshy area that's going to bring a lot of these different animals to it. In addition, because of the development that is going on here in Jacksonville, we are unfortunately creating situations where wildlife used to be are now homes, and so they're losing their habitat, which does sometimes mean that we're now in their habitat, so you may have to just share your space sometimes until you can hire the right people to get your space back, in a sense. But realistically, things to consider here is, again, you are going to see alligators, not necessarily on your property always, but if you do back up to a lake here in Jacksonville, most likely at some point you'll probably see one in the lake. I still remember, a funny story, but when I was in high school, I went to Atlantic Coast High School for reference. But when I was in high school, I played football, and we did have some lakes kind of near our practice fields, and there's also a baseball field near our practice fields. I'll never forget to this day, me and a couple of my friends at the time, we were walking back after a day of practice, and we actually had an alligator on second base on the baseball field. So the whole joke was, oh, there he goes, he's round second, heading to third. But ultimately, what the school did do at that time is they did hire the right professionals to come out and relocate and rehome that alligator. So you do see that quite a bit. Snakes are kind of the same thing. Again, if you have a cat, most likely if the cat's ever outside, you may end up with a present here and there of a snake in your house. Typically, though, they're not poisonous. But just things that do kind of pop up when you're living here in Jacksonville. So if you're watching this and you're not much of a snake person or alligator person, again, that's okay. You're not going to see them all that often, but it is something that they are present and something that you have to always consider when moving to Jacksonville or Florida in general. In addition, during those summer months, we do tend to have sometimes a bit of a increase in flies, or as we call them, no-see-ums. And so when you are outside, you do sometimes see that you're going to get a little bit more bit up with them than maybe during the winter time when they're more dormant. And that is why we do see a lot of times people, when they do buy homes that have back porches or patios, that they will screen them in to kind of give them the ability to use their back porch during those times of the year. So overall, something to consider when you've lived in Florida as long as I have, you kind of get used to it. But overall, there are also amazing parts of the wildlife here, such as the amazing fishing due to having so much different waterways to choose from, that in some regards can kind of make up for it if you kind of like that kind of stuff. So overall, definitely the wildlife is something that you have to really consider when it comes to moving here to Jacksonville. So this next one I'm going to go over is one that I get asked all the time. And to be honest, as a realtor, there's only so much I can really dive into with it. But again, you don't always want me to be the best source when it comes to this one. Now, you're probably wondering, or maybe you already guessed what the next point is I'm going to go over. But the next one we're going to go over is actually the crime. So with any major city, you're always going to have some level of crime because there's always going to be good areas and bad areas, so to speak, in any given city. Now, when it comes to crime here in Jacksonville, we have it. Again, like I said, what city doesn't have it? And it's always important to kind of look into what areas may have more or higher crime levels than others when making your decision on moving to Jacksonville or where to live in Jacksonville. Now, I always tell people, there's amazing crime maps online that kind of dive into a lot of it to always check out. And that's really where you'd want to go to get a better feel of what part of Jacksonville makes the most sense for you, because that's where it's going to really pile in and give you the cold, hard facts. Because at the end of the day, we all have opinions, and ultimately opinions can be good, they can be bad. They can tell the whole picture or no picture at all for any given topic. And so when it comes to crime, I always come from the standpoint of, facts don't lie. And that's where these websites that you can go to that do have these crime maps, those are facts. And at the end of the day, those will give you a good understanding of what Jacksonville has to offer or not offer in that sense to help you determine if Jacksonville is the right fit for you. Now, again, if you want my opinion, you can always call me, text me, email me. We can always discuss that a little bit deeper, a little bit further. Although, like I said, it's one of those things, every city has crime, it just comes down to how much. And again, every area in a city is gonna have different levels of crime. But ultimately, when it really comes down to knowing what the best area is or really what's going on in different areas of Jacksonville, you just gotta find those crime maps online and just see what they kind of paint picture-wise of what's going on in those areas within Jacksonville. But after crime, we're now going to talk about schools. Schools are something that really, if it's probably one of the questions I get asked the most, or one of the criteria that I have to kind of go through the most with people when it comes to living in or moving to Jacksonville. So again, it's something you really have to consider when deciding on, is Jacksonville the city for me and my family? And the reason I say that is there's a lot of different offerings for schools here. You have your public school system, but you also have your private school system. And here in Jacksonville, we have multiple layers to that. We have the charter schools, we have the magnet schools, and we also have the public, not almost, but Christian kind of schools as well. And so realistically, when it comes to the schooling here, we do tend to see people tend to gravitate towards parts like Clay County or Nassau County or St. Johns County when going the public school route, especially St. Johns County, because the schools are considered some of the best schools, public school wise, in the state of Florida per different websites like greatschools.com, or maybe it's greatschools.org, don't quote me on that. Either way, if you type in great schools on Google, you'll find it. But needless to say, that is something that, I have seen people kind of, choose not to move it to Jacksonville or maybe specifically Duval County because of the schools. Now, ultimately in Duval County, we have some amazing private schools such as Bowles, which is going to be more almost like a college prep kind of higher level schooling system. You're going to pay for that, but it is probably one of the best private schools in the state of Florida. But in addition, you also have Episcopal High School, your Providence School, Trinity Christian, University Christian, a lot of different schools like that do have really good ratings and are very popular with residents here in Jacksonville. And then for magnet schools, you're going to have your Paxton and your Stanton College Preparatory Academy. Those are going to be ones that are really going to be more dialed into getting your son or your daughter to that next level of college. And a lot of times, they're going to have those IB programs that are really upper level programs that, although the work is hard, it will definitely prepare you for that next level for schooling in your life. And then for the charter schools, again, those are also another option for residents here as well. So with the schools, it is one of those things that you have to consider the positive and negatives of them when you're thinking about moving to Jacksonville. And it is one of those things that I love to go over, because if you're thinking about moving here, you definitely want to know everything there has to do about schools. So again, if you want to know more about individual school or area here, call me, text me, email me. Happy to help go over all of that and figure out what the best fit is for you and your family. From there though, we're now going to move on to the last item to consider when moving here. All right, we're almost wrapped up, but there's one more point that I do want to go over, which is the job market as it relates also to the cost of living here in Jacksonville. Again, if you're thinking about moving here, that is something that is going to be highly important for you and your family to determine if Jacksonville's the right fit, because again, that's what's going to either keep you here for a long time or a short time. And obviously my goal is, if you're moving here, is that you're choosing Jacksonville for the long haul. And ultimately what I can tell you about Jacksonville is, there are quite a bit of job openings, there are quite a bit of job opportunities here in Jacksonville. However, there is something to be said that it's still, having a hard time pay wage-wise, keeping pace with the cost of living here in Jacksonville. And it's a tough thing because obviously the cost of insurance is one of the highest in the country. Cost of car insurance is also pretty high up there. As I already mentioned, taxes are not necessarily doing you any favors either. And with home prices still being elevated where they're at, it does kind of, and interest rates as well, it does kind of paint a picture of, you do have to make sure you can afford to live here in a sense. Now, ultimately, it's still one of the most affordable major metros, if not the most affordable major metro here in the state of Florida. We're still going to be much more affordable than Orlando or Miami or Tampa. But at the same time, there used to be a larger gap there, and that gap is not nearly as large as it used to be because, as I mentioned previously, Jacksonville is now on the map and no longer that hidden gem that it used to be, before COVID. So that's something you really do have to consider is, when it comes to the cost of living, really getting a good idea of what does that breakdown look like. What should I expect to pay for groceries? What should I expect to pay for childcare if you do have a child who's at a younger age? What should I expect to pay for pleasure, entertainment? So those are all definitely things that you have to think about. And Jacksonville does provide an opportunity to be able to move to, but with the mindset of the numbers have to work. Because again, I'm a facts guy. The numbers don't lie. The numbers have to work. So ultimately, that is something you have to consider when moving here. And again, if you want to go more deeper into what the cost of living is like here in Jacksonville, we did do an amazing cost of living video, maybe a little long, but definitely worth it, where we kind of break down, how the cost of living compares here in Jacksonville compared to other cities in the state and also the country as a whole. And like I said, overall it is a very affordable city to live in, just not maybe as it used to be. So ultimately though, that is gonna kind of wrap up that part. But really when it comes to moving here, there's gonna be a lot of things to consider, a lot of things to think about, just like there would be for any city that you're thinking about moving to. You know, again, what's the transportation like? What are the schools like? What's the cost of homes going for? What are taxes and insurance going for? You know, does the city or the state have a state income tax? That's a beauty of Florida and of Jacksonville, is there's no state income tax to live here. So again, the money you're saving there, you could say you're just putting towards your taxes for property taxes or your insurance cost. But at the same time, there is a bit of a trade-off there, and I think that that's a huge bonus of living in the state of Florida, is not having that state income tax. And so really when it comes to moving to anywhere in Florida or the United States or Jacksonville, it is important to have a trusted person you can go to help give you advice, help advise you. That's something that we pride ourselves on. So again, as I mentioned previously, if you have any questions, if there's anything we can do to help, you just gotta call, text, email me. Because at the end of the day, my goal whenever I work with anybody is to help them find the right house in the right neighborhood, in the right part of the city. Or again, if it's not Jacksonville, you know, I have a great network of people that I can put you in touch with. Because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that when you're thinking about moving anywhere, but hopefully Jacksonville, that, you know, you have all the facts and that, you know, nothing has been held back from you. And that's what I always try to do here. So I'll see you guys again in the next video, and we'll go from there.